A 61-year-old retired sea captain was testing a new magnetic net at the quiet harbor of Rockport, Maine, when something impossible clanked against the metal. What he pulled from the dark water wasn't rusted junk, nor a forgotten anchor, but something tightly sealed, deliberately hidden and out of place. The briefcase was covered in corrosion and chained shut. Authorities thought it was just debris, until they opened it. Inside was something no one could explain. When the experts arrived and examined the contents, even the oldest among them fell silent. There was no doubt. What lay inside was worth millions, but the bigger question echoed through town. Who buried it, and why? It's a story full of secrets, lost wealth, and a decision that would change the captain's life forever. Would you dare to pull it from the water? Stick around, subscribe, and follow these real stories that seem too strange to be true. Captain Eldridge L. Moore had salt in his blood and the sea in his bones. At 61, his weathered hands and deep-set eyes told a story few could match. He'd spent 4 decades on the Atlantic, mostly hauling lobster traps and guiding tourist charters along the craggy coast of Rockport, Maine. He wasn't rich, but he wasn't looking to be. He had his boat, a rusting but loyal trawler named Hannah Marie, and a small cabin near the pier. That was enough. He had retired just 2 years earlier, but as any sailor will tell you, the sea doesn't let go that easily. On quiet mornings, El would still go down to the dock, sipping black coffee and chatting with younger fishermen. He liked watching the tides shift and hearing the water slap against the pilings. It kept his mind sharp. That's when he'd heard about magnetic fishing, a strange new hobby taking root among local teens and treasure hunters. You tie a powerful magnet to a rope, drop it in the water, and pull up whatever metallic surprise clings to it. Tools, bikes, old nails, sometimes a safe if you're lucky. Most called it harmless fun. Elle called it interesting. That Thursday morning started just like the others. The sky was a clean blue, dotted with the occasional gull, and the smell of salt and diesel hung in the air. Elle had recently bought himself a strong neodymium fishing magnet online, something to pass the time with and maybe pull up a few relics from Rockport's long-forgotten wharf. He arrived early before the harbor grew busy. He tied off the end of his rope to a rusted cleat and swung the heavy magnet over the edge of the dock. It dropped with a satisfying splash, bubbles rising to the surface as it sank into the murk. Then he waited. He pulled once. Nothing. Pulled again. A small hunk of scrap metal, a nail, half a crab trap. He chuckled to himself, tossing the finds into a bucket beside him. Just as he was about to reel in for a coffee break, he felt a sudden pull. Not just resistance. Weight. Real weight. It didn't tug like an anchor or drift like a tangled net. It was solid, heavy, firm. He adjusted his stance and began to heave, inch by inch. Whatever was clinging to that magnet wasn't letting go easily. A couple of passers-by stopped to watch, curious about what the old captain was dragging up. When the edge finally breached the water, Elle saw metal, but not rusted iron or pipe. It was flat, boxy, dark, almost too perfect. It rose slowly, dripping with brackish water and tangled kelp. Then it landed on the dock with a wet, resonating thud. A black briefcase, completely sealed, corroded in spots, but clearly once expensive. The handle was still intact, and the outer edges were rimmed with brass. A thick, rusted chain was wrapped around it, ending in a padlock the size of a fist. Everyone paused. A nearby fisherman asked if he'd found a bomb. Elle didn't answer right away. He just crouched beside it, his eyes narrowing. He had pulled strange things from the sea before, but never anything like this. The briefcase was unnaturally heavy, far more than it should have been, and oddly cold, despite the sun. Elle tapped it with his knuckles. It echoed slightly, as if filled with solid items. Not electronics, not liquid. Valuable. He didn't open it there. Not yet. He hauled the briefcase onto Hannah Marie, fired up the old diesel engine, and pushed off from the dock. A few heads turned. No one said anything, but the air had shifted. Curiosity, tension, suspicion, maybe even a little fear. Elle motored out just far enough to clear the dock, but close enough to still see the harbor. He lowered anchor and opened a battered toolbox. From it, he retrieved a rusted bolt cutter, something he hadn't used in years. With careful force, he bit into the chain link. It took 2 solid squeezes before the metal snapped free and the briefcase slumped slightly. The padlock, too corroded to pick, was easier. A crowbar did the job. prying the case open with a groan that made Elle's skin prickle. The hinges gave way reluctantly, and then it was open. He didn't move for a full minute. Inside, layered carefully in old oilskin, were bundles of papers, each wrapped in wax paper and labeled in fading fountain pen script. Next to them, nestled into the lining like a case of expensive cigars, lay half a dozen velvet pouches. Elle opened one. Jewels, deep red rubies, several of them, polished and round as marbles. Another pouch held emeralds. Another, what looked like uncut diamonds. His hands trembled slightly. He looked around. No one was near. He reached for the papers, slowly unfolding one. It was a stock certificate, original, dated 1932, issued by a company named Dumont Communications. Incarnel's brows furrowed. Another certificate followed, General Electric, dated 1941. Another, IBM, 1950. Dozens of them, neatly stacked and untouched by time. He didn't recognize all the companies, but some he did. Big ones, survivors, thrivers. That's when the weight of it hit him. If these certificates were real, and somehow still valid, he shut the briefcase quickly, locked it again as best he could, and covered it with an old tarp. The sea no longer felt calm. Something ancient had just been stirred, and Elle wasn't sure what the consequences would be. Back at the dock, he didn't say a word to anyone. He loaded the briefcase into his truck and drove straight home. There, he placed it under the floorboards of his cabin, sealed away beneath an old cedar plank he hadn't lifted in 20 years. He spent the rest of the day trying to stay calm, sipping coffee and flipping through old legal books he kept on a shelf. That night, he didn't sleep. What if it was stolen? What if it belonged to someone dangerous? What if it was cursed, or part of some hidden inheritance gone wrong? The next morning, Elle knew he needed help, but not just from anyone. He needed someone with knowledge, someone discreet, and someone he trusted. So, he made a call. Sam Whitaker was a retired attorney, the kind who didn't mind reading a 70-year-old legal document for fun. He had helped Elle out before with property filings and once with a strange dispute involving a shipwreck claim. He owed Elle a favor, and Elle never cashed it in. Until now. They met later that afternoon at Sam's place, just north of Camden. Elle arrived with the briefcase wrapped in a wool blanket. "What is it?" Sam asked, eyeing the bundle. "Something I pulled from the harbor. I need you to tell me if it's worth anything, or if I need to bury it back where it came from." That got Sam's attention. They laid the case on the kitchen table and slowly opened it again. Sam, to his credit, didn't say much at first. He examined the certificates with a jeweler's loupe, his lips pursed. He unfolded some, held others to the light, tapped at serial numbers with his pen. "These aren't fakes," he finally said. "They're old, original, and if the companies are still around, then yeah, some of these could be worth a fortune. But I need to check the surviving records. Many of these companies went public decades ago. It depends on stock splits, mergers, ownership. And the jewels?" Elle asked, showing him the pouches. Sam opened one and let out a long whistle. "You weren't fishing with worms, were you?" "Magnet," Elle said. Fished up the case near Pier 3. It was chained shut. Sam looked at him carefully. "You know what this means, right? These didn't just fall off a boat. Someone hid this. Intentionally." "I know. And now that someone else might come looking." "I know." Sam rubbed his temple. "All right, give me a week. I'll start with the stock certificates. We'll see what's still valid. Then we'll figure out if you need to sell quietly or make a deal you won't live long enough to regret." Elle nodded. As he left Sam's house and drove back toward Rockport, the road seemed quieter than usual. The trees swayed, heavy with summer, and even the birdsong seemed to dim. He had found treasure, real treasure, but the question lingered like mist over the harbor. Who put it there, and why? For the next 3 days, Captain L. Moore lived with the strange tension of anticipation and dread. The briefcase, now wrapped in layers of plastic and tucked inside a locked tool chest beneath his workbench, stayed hidden. He barely slept. Every knock at the door, every car passing down the gravel road, made him pause. He kept checking the windows, his ears tuned to sounds that didn't belong, like the crunch of unfamiliar footsteps or the low idle of a waiting engine. He hadn't told anyone else, not his sister in Bar Harbor, not the guys at the dock, just Sam. And Sam was solid, or at least Elle hoped he was. On the 4th morning, Elle's phone rang. It was early. too early. "Elle," came Sam's voice, hushed and cautious. "We need to talk. Come over. Now." Elle didn't ask questions. He grabbed his coat, slid the small revolver from the drawer into his back pocket, and left. When he arrived at Sam's house, he was greeted not at the front door but through the side garage, where the lights were low and the curtains drawn. Sam had set up a makeshift desk covered in printouts, manila folders, and legal pads littered with calculations. "You weren't kidding," Sam said, motioning him inside. "It's real. Some of those certificates, GE, IBM, they've split so many times I had to cross-check them through 6 financial databases. Conservatively speaking, you're sitting on 8 to 12 million, minimum." Elle blinked. "And that's not counting the gems. I had a friend appraise one of the rubies, quietly. If the rest are like that, add another few million." The numbers felt unreal. 8 to 12 million? He had never even seen 7 figures on a bank statement, let alone 8. "Okay," Elle said, steadying his breath. "So what now?" Sam rubbed his chin. "Well, here's where things get tricky. Legally, you found this in the harbor, technically public property, but because it was clearly hidden, sealed, and chained, it might be classified as lost property or even buried treasure under maritime law. There's precedent, but we need to be very careful. If you declare this too loudly, you'll have claimants crawling out of every hole in New England." Elle leaned forward. "So we don't declare it?" "Exactly, not yet. I've started filing quiet ownership inquiries. We'll need to authenticate everything through an intermediary firm, one that specializes in old financial instruments. The good news is most of these companies still exist, and according to the records, none of these certificates were marked void or transferred, meaning they were probably never cashed in." Elle tried to process the enormity of it. Some unknown person, decades ago, had sealed away millions in paper and stones, then thrown them into the sea. Not lost, hidden, and he had pulled it up with a magnet. "You didn't find this by accident, Elle. Someone meant for it to stay hidden." Sam showed him a final document, an old insurance ledger, water-stained and torn, but legible. It was dated 1957 and referenced a policy taken out on behalf of a man named William Shard. Elle froze. "I know that name," he whispered. Sam looked up. "From where?" Elle's mind flipped backward, through storms and ports and drunken stories shared by old captains. Shard? He was a shipping magnate, ran 3 vessels out of Gloucester in the 50s, lost one at sea in 1958, the Arden Bay. Story goes he never recovered, went bankrupt, disappeared. People said he faked his death. Sam frowned. If this belonged to him, and he faked his death, maybe he was hiding his assets, dumping them where no one would ever find them. And I just did. They both sat in silence, the weight of it thick between them. The idea that this treasure had been sitting in Rockport Harbor for over 60 years, untouched and forgotten, was wild. But what was wilder still was this. If William Shard had gone through the trouble of hiding it, chaining it, sealing it, waterproofing it, had he intended to come back for it, or had someone else put it there? Elle left Sam's house an hour later, with a new sense of paranoia stitched into his skin. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, though the road back was empty and the sky now overcast. That night he double-locked every door and placed a chair under the doorknob, just in case. But what he didn't know, what no one could have known, was that someone had been watching. The next morning, when Elle went to check the cabin's perimeter, he found fresh boot prints in the dirt behind the shed. Not his, not Sam's. Wide-soled, heavy. Someone had been there. He called Sam immediately, but Sam had his own news. "Elle," he said, "I've been getting calls. Anonymous numbers. Someone asking questions about vintage stock claims. Very specific ones. They know something's up." Elle clenched the phone in his fist. "Do we bury it again?" "No," Sam said. "It's too late for that. We move forward, but fast. I'm bringing in someone who specializes in asset concealment and legal laundering. He's expensive, but he's clean." That afternoon, a third man arrived at Sam's garage. He wore a tailored jacket, no tie, and carried a briefcase that looked newer than anything Elle had ever owned. His name was Hal Rennick, and he didn't bother with small talk. He looked over the case's contents for an hour, checking for signs of forgery, cross-referencing watermarks and printing styles. When he finished, he sat down and delivered his assessment. "You're sitting on real wealth," he said. "The jewels are traceable, but not easily. The certificates, if filed properly, will take time to redeem, but they're legitimate. What you need now is a shield, a holding company, a quiet bank in the Caymans, and patience. Will that keep it safe? Elle asked. Hal gave a small smile. Safer than the harbor. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a flurry of notarizations, encrypted files, secure couriers, and multiple trips to Boston. Elle barely recognized the life he was living. At night he would sit by the harbor where it all began, staring out at the spot where the briefcase had surfaced. He still couldn't believe it. He had gone out looking for old nails and pulled out a hidden fortune. But then, something changed. The calls to Sam's office increased. Some came with muffled voices, others just held silence. One night, Elle found a note stuck under his windshield. Some things should stay buried. He didn't tell Sam. Instead, he started keeping a loaded shotgun next to the door and began parking his truck in different spots each night, just in case. A week later, news broke that a local diver had found traces of an old container beneath the harbor, one that had recently been disturbed. The story ran small, tucked in the second section of the town paper, but it was enough. The town was buzzing. Rumors swirled. Some claimed a sunken safe was discovered. Others said a mob stash. Some even spoke of Nazi gold dumped off the coast during the war. No one mentioned stock certificates or rubies, but the sense of mystery grew. Then came the strangers, men in suits, too well dressed for Rockport. Quiet, polite, asking questions at bars and hardware stores. Someone even claimed to have seen one of them on Sam's street, snapping photos. Elle knew then they were getting close. Sam made a decision. We cash out half, he said. Quickly, quietly, we move the rest offshore. Enough to give you freedom, and enough to keep hidden. The more we sit on this, the more danger we attract. Elle agreed. Within 10 days, the first round of transfers began. A shell corporation in Delaware, a blind trust in Belize, and then, at last, a wired deposit into a brand new account. 8 digits. Elle stared at the screen, unable to speak. For a man who had made a living hauling lobster traps and cleaning fish guts off his boots, the number felt like it belonged to someone else. But it was real. It was his. He was a millionaire. And yet, the feeling of danger hadn't left. Because while the money was clean, the briefcase's origins were not. Somewhere, someone still knew. Someone who wanted it buried, and maybe they hadn't given up. So, if you had been in Elle's shoes, would you have opened the case or thrown it back? Let me know what you would have done in the comments. And where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to know how far this story's traveled. Give this video a thumbs up if it pulled you in. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life mysteries that are just beginning to surface. And the next twist? It's coming soon. The money was real. The certificates were authenticated. And for the first time in his life, Captain Elmore didn't have to think about bills or winter heating oil, or whether he could afford new engine parts for Hannah Marie. He could finally breathe, but he didn't, because just beneath the relief lived a quiet terror. Sam and Hal had taken care of the hard parts, legally shielding the assets, creating the cover stories, navigating tax shadows. But neither of them could explain the man seen watching Elle's cabin from across the street 2 nights ago, or the envelope slipped under Sam's door that simply read, "You know it was never yours." Elle changed his routine. He no longer walked the harbor at dawn. He stopped talking to the other fishermen. He paid cash for groceries in another town. His world, once simple and filled with brine and routine, had become a closed loop of suspicion. Still, Elle couldn't stop himself from wondering. Where had the briefcase come from? Really? He had a name, William Shard, but no story, no context. He hadn't told Sam this yet, but a few nights prior, curiosity had gotten the better of him. He drove to the Rockport Historical Society and asked the volunteer on duty if they had any archived information on Shard. The man returned 20 minutes later with a dusty manila folder, its edges browned by time. Elle read every page. William Shard, born 1911 in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Son of a shipbuilder, rose fast in the post-war years as a shipping baron, transporting goods between Boston and Newfoundland. By 1955, owned 3 commercial vessels. That part Elle knew, but it got darker. In 1957, Shard was indicted, though never convicted, for financial fraud. The case involved falsified import records, offshore accounts, and missing manifests. The investigation was dropped when key witnesses disappeared or refused to testify. A year later, the Arden Bay, his flagship vessel, went missing off the coast of Rockport during a foggy night. No bodies recovered, no distress call. Shard was presumed dead, though his body was never found. The official story was presumed lost at sea. The whispers? That he faked it all. L leaned back in his chair at the archives, the musty scent of old paper clinging to his clothes. If Shard had known he was going down, what better move than to hide his wealth and vanish? L imagined the man, 46 years old, slipping through the fog on a lifeboat with a waterproof case chained shut. Did he bury it himself, or was it tossed from a ship? Had he planned to retrieve it later, or had something gone wrong? Or was it someone else who sealed it up? A rival? A partner? A betrayal? L left the archives with more questions than answers. When he returned home, the front door was slightly ajar. Nothing was taken. Nothing was broken. But everything had been touched. Drawers opened. Floorboards shifted. Even the sealed tool chest had been moved, by less than an inch, but enough for L to know. Whoever they were careful, professional. He didn't call the police. Instead, he drove straight to Sam's. "They've been inside," L said, his voice flat. Sam nodded. "I've had 2 tails on me this week. Al says we may need to move the remainder of the assets sooner than we thought. Do you think it's the government?" "No. This feels older, personal, like someone's guarding a secret, not chasing a crime." They sat in silence. Then Sam pulled out a flash drive and slid it across the table. "I found something else. Quiet records. Legal but buried. A safety deposit box in a New York bank. Registered in Shard's name but never opened. It was tied to one of the corporations he once owned." L stared at the flash drive. "You think there's more?" Sam smiled faintly. "I think you've only pulled up the first link in a much longer chain." The next day, they were on a train to New York. L hadn't been out of Maine in years. The noise of the city rattled him. The horns, the sirens, the sheer number of people. But Sam moved like he'd lived here all his life, navigating streets and subways until they reached a discreet stone building in Midtown with no signage. The banker met them in a private room. After some verification and old paperwork that Sam had fished out of the corporate ether, the man disappeared and returned 15 minutes later with a blackened metal box. It was locked with a combination dial. Sam turned to L. "Your magnet found the case. Maybe you're meant to open this one." L hesitated, then placed his hand on the dial. It was cold. He turned it slowly. 3 numbers. He had no clue what the combination could be, so he did what any old fisherman might. He tried Shard's birth year, 1911. Click. The box opened. Inside was a single key, a faded photograph of a woman standing beside a yacht, and a folded map, marked with 3 red circles along the New England coast. Sam exhaled sharply. This just turned into something bigger. They took the box back to Rockport that same night. L couldn't shake the image of the woman in the photo, her hair done in 1950s curls, her hand resting lightly on the shoulder of a man whose face had been torn out. Back in his cabin, L spread out the map beneath a lamp. The 3 red circles marked coastal inlets, one near Bar Harbor, another near Gloucester, and a third just outside Rockport. The implication was clear. Shard hadn't hidden just one case. He'd hidden 3. And L had found the first. The next morning, L and Sam launched Hannah Marie at dawn. The wind was low, the sky peach-orange. They motored quietly past the outer harbor, toward the rocky coves east of Owl's Head. L dropped the magnet again. The current was calmer here, but the bottom was thick with sediment and kelp. Twice they pulled up nothing. On the 3rd drop, the magnet clanged, then stuck. L hauled, muscles straining, hands blistering. It was heavy. He could feel the water pulling against it as if whatever lay beneath didn't want to leave. Then it breached. Another case. Similar in shape, slightly smaller. This one, bound in what looked like brass wire and wrapped in layers of deteriorated oilcloth. Sam helped him hoist it onto the deck. They stared. "We found another." L didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked out at the sea. Something felt unfinished. As if with every answer, the sea offered 2 more questions. They waited until they were back at the dock to unwrap it. This one didn't have stock certificates. Instead, it contained a small leather-bound journal, dozens of foreign coins, and a hollowed-out book filled with old traveler's checks and maritime shipping ledgers. At the bottom, A name. Ernst Breyer. Another alias? Sam asked. Elle flipped through the journal. The entries were in coded shorthand, but here and there he saw hints. Words like transfer, Lisbon, and operation. One entry referenced a numbered account in Switzerland. This was more than money. This was a trail, one that spanned decades and oceans. Elle's quiet life in Rockport had cracked wide open. He didn't know yet that a third man, one who had been watching him since the first day at the harbor, was now on his way. He didn't know that the discovery had triggered a long dormant alert in a forgotten agency file labeled Shard Contingency Protocols. And he didn't know that someone, somewhere, had just whispered, "He found one." Now I've got to ask, if you were Elle, would you keep digging? Or would you disappear before someone made you regret it? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and while you're there, tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love hearing how far these true stories travel. And don't forget to hit that like button if you're hooked, and subscribe so you don't miss the next piece of this mystery. Trust me, it's only just beginning. Sam sat on the edge of the dock, legs hanging above the water, the journal in his lap. He hadn't said much in the last hour, his face dark with thought. Elle could tell that something in those pages had disturbed him. "What do you think?" Elle asked, drying his hands with an old towel. Sam looked up. "I think we've stepped into something much older than we imagined." He flipped the journal open to a section marked by a faded red ribbon. The entry was dated June 12, 1955. Transfer secured, Lisbon holds, Geneva prepped, East contact confirmed. All items to be kept in separate containers. Breyer insists on isolation. He fears double cross. Elle read the words slowly. Breyer was one of Shard's partners. Sam nodded. Or his handler, or his enemy. We don't know. But here's the strange part. Breyer's name shows up in Cold War intel reports. Alleged smuggler. Possibly connected to Eastern Bloc defectors. This goes beyond financial crime. This might have touched espionage. Elle rubbed his temples. So the jewels, the certificates. What if those weren't just riches? What if they were leverage? Or payment? Sam said. The thought lingered like fog. A day later, Hal Rennick returned. He had flown in after quietly running names through international archives and old financial trails. He sat down in Sam's garage and unfolded a large map. "I think we've been looking at this wrong," he began. "You assumed Shard hid 3 cases, but I believe there were more. 5, maybe 6. Only 3 were marked on the map because they were accessible from this coast." He pointed to a line running from Rockport to Gloucester to New Bedford. Those 3 were domestic. But Breyer? He was a European operator. If he was part of the same network, then it's likely that at least one stash is in Europe, maybe more. Sam frowned. So what were they hiding? Hal shrugged. Documents, identities, leverage. This wasn't just stolen wealth. It was a contingency network. Think about it. Cold War, paranoia, people prepared for vanishing. These caches may have been escape kits for men like Shard, rich, powerful, wanted. Elle stood by the open case, staring at the foreign coins and the hollowed-out book. "What happens if we find another?" Hal smiled. "Then I'd suggest you stop calling yourself a fisherman." Later that night, Elle found himself sitting on the porch, listening to the sound of waves crashing gently beyond the bluff. He hadn't been on the water since recovering the second case. Something inside him hesitated, not from fear, but from the enormity of what he was unraveling. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was waiting for him to act, to lead them to the next piece. 2 days passed without incident. Sam resumed digging through the journal, slowly decoding passages with the help of a friend from his university days who once worked in naval intelligence. They worked in shifts, photographing pages, running translations, cross-referencing old maps. One message stood out. Green dot to starboard, not alone, never alone, danger and recovery. Sam pointed at it with his pen. "I think this was written just before one of the drops. It's a warning." Breyer suspected someone was following him. Elle leaned over. So they were being hunted even then. A silence settled in the garage. It was broken by a knock at the door. Sam stood slowly, checking the peephole. A young woman stood outside, dressed in a rain jacket despite the clear skies. She held an envelope in her hands and wore an expression that was difficult to read, somewhere between urgency and restraint. Sam opened the door halfway. "Yes?" She looked past him. "Is Captain Moore here?" Elle stepped forward. She held the envelope toward him. "My grandfather worked with William Shard. He died 2 months ago. This was in his effects. I was told..." to deliver it to the one who finds the waterlock. The what? She glanced at the briefcase on the table. The waterlock. That's what he called it. She handed the envelope to Elle, then turned without another word. Within moments, she was gone, swallowed by the quiet afternoon. Elle opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a photo, faded and creased, of Shard and two other men standing on the deck of the Arden Bay. On the back was a single line in ink. If you're reading this, they missed one. Underneath the photo was a small plastic square, a 16mm film reel. Hal, intrigued, arranged for it to be digitized that same evening. The footage was short, only about 2 minutes. Grainy black and white film showed a man resembling Shard, handing a waterproof case to another man, possibly Briar, aboard a docked vessel. They both wore naval coats. A third man stood to the side, partially in shadow. Then, something chilling. The camera shifted briefly and caught the shoreline behind them. There, on the bluff above the harbor, was a man in a trench coat watching silently. He didn't move, didn't speak. Elle paused the footage. Even in grainy resolution, the shape of the man was oddly familiar. The build, the posture. Then it hit him. The man looked eerily like one of the strangers who had been following him over the last few weeks. Sam leaned in. No way. This is from 1957. But what if it's not the same man? Elle whispered. What if it's the same role? The implication sent chills down their spines. There had always been watchers, guardians of this secret. Hal stood and began pacing. I think this was an operation. Not criminal, but covert. Maybe sanctioned, maybe rogue, but definitely organized. So what now? Elle asked. We find the third case, Sam said. Hal nodded. And then you disappear, permanently. The final location on the map was a cove near Gloucester, Massachusetts, a place known for its sharp rocks, shifting sands, and unpredictable currents. Elle didn't hesitate. 3 days later, under the cover of morning fog, he and Sam launched Hannah Marie again. This time, they brought diving equipment and a sonar device. The cove was as treacherous as the stories claimed. The magnet clanged onto false targets several times before locking hard onto something 20 feet below the surface. Elle dove in. The water was frigid, clarity poor, but the magnet's cable led him straight to the shape, wedged between rocks, buried halfway in sand. He worked quickly, prying it loose. When he surfaced, the case broke the waterline with a shuddering splash. This one was different. It wasn't a briefcase. It was a military-grade lockbox, rusted but intact, with seals still in place and a U.S. naval insignia barely visible through the corrosion. Back on the boat, Elle stared at it, his breath steaming in the cold air. This one doesn't look like the others. Sam opened it with a crowbar. Inside was a tightly bound series of microfilms, a folder marked Operation Thistle, and a bundle of 1950s-era passports, some American, some foreign, all with different aliases. And at the very bottom, a small revolver wrapped in silk and a single envelope. Elle opened it. Inside was a note, typed, clean. If you found this, you've been followed. Trust no one. You now hold the keys to a program buried by 6 governments. Return this material to Washington. Do not sell. Do not share. They are still watching. No signature. No date. Hal stared at the documents, stunned. This isn't treasure anymore. This is blackmail. Insurance. A vault of secrets designed to buy protection. Sam nodded slowly. And someone out there still wants it covered. The revelation redefined everything. Elle's magnet hadn't just pulled up lost wealth. It had pulled up a ghost protocol, decades old and still active. Now, they weren't just rich, they were marked. And the worst part? They didn't know who was coming next. Would you have opened the third case? Or walked away? Let me know in the comments. And hey, where in the world are you watching this from? The Rockport mystery is reaching people far beyond Maine, and I want to know just how far it's traveled. Hit that like button if this story has you hooked, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. Because in the final chapter, everything unravels, and someone isn't going to make it out. Elle sat in the dark of his cabin, staring at the case from Gloucester. The documents inside weren't just old, they were explosive. Names, programs, safe house locations, financial routes disguised as fishing operations. If even half of it was real, it meant there had been an entire underground network operating on American soil during the Cold War, sanctioned or not. He felt like a man who'd hooked a trout and reeled in a shark. Hal had taken photos of the files and sent encrypted scans to a contact in Washington. The response came less than 12 hours later, but not from who they expected. The phone rang once, then stopped. Then again. 3 times, then silence. That was the signal. Sam's secure line lit up. A man on the other end, speaking with precise diction and a voice devoid of emotion, said only this: "You have 36 hours. After that, containment measures escalate." Then the line went dead. Elle's gut turned. The old paranoia had transformed into certainty. They weren't being watched. They were being allowed to exist. For now. Hal leaned over the table. "We have 2 options," he said. "We deliver the documents to the agency and hope they wipe our involvement clean. Or we vanish, take what we can, disappear, and never speak of this again." Sam didn't hesitate. "We give it to them. I didn't sign up for this kind of heat." But Elle stayed silent. He remembered something in that note from the 3rd case. Do not sell, do not share. They are still watching. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about survival, about legacy. He looked out the window. The sky was beginning to darken, the edges of dusk creeping along the pines. Somewhere out there, men in suits were preparing for a quiet war, one without gunshots or headlines, just disappearances, accidents, silences. They returned the documents the next day. Hal arranged a courier drop at a small airfield in Vermont, monitored but untraceable. 2 black SUVs appeared. 3 men exited, took the case, checked the contents without a word, and left. No acknowledgement, no threats, just gone. But something had changed. 2 days later, Elle received an envelope at the cabin. No return address, no stamp, just tucked into the screen door like a piece of junk mail. Inside, a photograph. It showed Elle, standing on the deck of Hannah Marie, holding the magnet rope in one hand and the briefcase in the other. The angle was high, taken from a rooftop or drone, time-stamped. The day he found the first case. On the back, just a single line. Right place, wrong time. Don't cast again. He didn't. From that day on, Elle sold the boat, gave it to a cousin in Portland. He didn't tell them why. Sam returned to his legal work. Quieter now. Less interested in court drama and more in old maps. Hal disappeared entirely. One day, his number worked. The next, nothing. His email, phone, socials, all erased. As for the fortune, the portion Elle had secured through the sale of certified stock and part of the jewels had been safely moved to an offshore account under a name that no longer existed. The funds were real, but invisible. He lived simply, bought a truck, donated anonymously to local veterans, never touched the remaining assets. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, he'd pull out the second case, the one with Breyer's journal. He'd read it like a ghost story, tracing the lines of a world that once buzzed beneath the surface of the one we know. In time, he started writing things down, not for fame, not for revenge, but so someone would know the truth in case they were tempted to search. Because here's what he learned: secrets never stay buried, they just wait. And every so often, they surface, like a rusted briefcase pulled from the harbor, or a face in a grainy photo standing still while the world shifts. Elle never told anyone what really happened, not the whole story, but he left clues, embedded in coastal markers, in boat names, in numbers etched on docks only he and a handful of old captains remembered. Maybe one day someone will find them. Maybe they'll go digging, and maybe they won't make it back. So the question becomes, if you were casting a magnet into the deep and you felt it lock onto something heavy, unmoving, and ancient, would you pull, or would you let it sink again, never knowing what could have changed your life, or ended it? That's the mystery of Rockport, and that's where this story rests, for now. If this story pulled you in, if it gave you chills or made you wonder just how many secrets are hiding beneath the surface, then do me a favor. Give this video a like, leave a comment. What would you have done in Elle's place? Would you have opened the case, or dropped it back into the deep? And most of all, tell me where in the world you're watching from. This story is bigger than one town, one man, or one harbor. Let's see how far it's traveled. Subscribe to the channel for more mysteries like this. True stories that don't just make you think, they make you watch your back. And hit that notification bell so you never miss the next drop. Because some secrets, they're waiting for you, just beneath the surface.